I meant to say this before I prayed. I just want to, again, highlight the opportunity next Sunday for the newcomers dessert. Anyone who hasn't become an owner, you're the special VIP guest. We have special VIP hats for you at the table. No, we don't really. But we'll have a great time. And so I want to especially invite you. Karen lives right down the street here. Very excited to meet you and get to know you. And for anyone, any of you who are here this morning, any of you watching online, if you've gone through it, if you're an owner, we welcome you as well. There are only so many seats around the table, so register early. We've had just a great time in our desserts in the past, so we welcome you to that. Now, Easter's come and gone. Obviously, there's no brunch this morning. There's no brunch, so it's demotivating people to come to church. But no, that's normal, and we had a great time last Sunday. Thank you all for anyone who served, who brought food, who helped. Want to say thank you to that. And I want to also say to you, church, those who are here this morning in person, if you're watching online, we need some help. I was sharing with Paul and Julie, they haven't been here in a while, how our team pre-COVID, we had a lot of people that helped. And we don't have a lot of people to help now. And so if you're able to come early, I also want to say this, if you're able to just stay late, it's very common on Sundays for my wife and I and Elliot to be the last ones, just putting every last thing away. So that's not a pity party. We signed up for it. That's my job. But if you're willing, if you're able, I know some people have to leave right away and all that, but if you're able to stay, come fellowship and let's be together. And those times can be very fun and rewarding as well. And I do warn you, the number of children are lower today, but sometimes balls are flying around at the last minute, so that makes it especially fun. Okay, so Easter has come and gone. What a great celebration we had on Resurrection Sunday. It was, celebrate this with me, because this is a big deal. It was the highest attended Sunday that we've had since pre-COVID. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, it was awesome. I mean, it was awesome. It really was. We had some newcomers show up. We had a lot of people that we hadn't seen in a while. That was awesome. That's exciting, but it's just the tip of the iceberg of what we believe God wants to do in and through us in this community. It's the tip of the iceberg. That's not it. Like, Easter Sunday is the pinnacle, and then we just kind of, take a deep breath until Christmas, and then that's not what Jesus died and rose again for. Now, every year our community groups follow an up, in, out rhythm. In the fall, we focus up, and we usually do some kind of Bible or theological study. Winter's cold, so we focus in with topics like focus on growing us. We did the Daniel plan this last winter, which was fabulous. And you can see many of us are getting fitter, and we're eating better, and we're all on a journey. We're all on a journey. So wherever you are in that journey, continue to journey. And if you need resources and tools and encouragement, we want to provide that and walk with you and encourage you on your physical, spiritual, emotional journey of health. But now we are in spring. Hallelujah. Anybody excited about spring? I am. Winter, see you later. Don't come back anytime soon. And spring, our focus is out. So we always focus up, in, and out, but the seasonal rhythms help us balance our focus throughout the year. We always want to focus on God, right? We always want to focus on community. We always want to focus on out, but those rhythms just help us make sure that we're including the rhythms that are most helpful. So this year we've added a 4-part series that goes along with what our groups are doing, The Art of Neighboring. This book is so powerful because it's about how to fulfill God's central mission for all Christians, loving our neighbors as we love ourselves. The subtitle of the book is Building Genuine Relationships Right Outside Your Door. By the way, we have a total of 11 new owners joining Restoration Church as owners. They'll be presented, some of them will be presented 2 weeks from today. We'll do a little ceremony during the service, which is very exciting. Not everybody will be here, so we'll do an A and B. Mary suggested an A and B version of that. That's fine. If you are becoming an owner, you get a book for free, and you get some other things as well. So if you're a couple joining and you want 2 books, you'll get one for free. Otherwise, the books are $9. And so if you are becoming an owner and you haven't gotten a book, we have them today. If you are part of a group and you haven't gotten a book or you just want a book, you can take one today, and then you can either pay through PayPal, you can just put a little memo, book, and just do $9 there, or you can give cash or check, just make a check made out to Restoration Church. Just don't ever give me money, because that's a disaster when the pastor has money in his pocket. So anyway, very excited about that. Our number one, this book is so helpful because our number one core value is authentic relationships. Healthy relationships drive everything. So the subtitle of the book, Building Genuine Relationships Right Outside Your Door, should coincide right along with what is most important as a church. And really, if you think about it, relationships are everything. Just think about your life. I find myself, I'm going to say this again, this is in my notes, but kind of off the notes for a minute. I find myself getting busy with stuff that often doesn't have anything to do with relationships, that pulls me away from the main thing. And maybe you can relate to that. So hopefully this will be relevant. It'll be encouraging. Maybe in some ways it'll be convicting. And I promise you that if you engage, if you jump into this over the next 6, 7, 8, 10 weeks, as long as it takes for us to go through this, we're just going to go through this series in 4 weeks, but then our community groups will be unpacking it. Your life and your family and your experience as a Christian can be totally revolutionized through this. We went through this a couple of years ago, and it did just that. I'll share a little bit more about that. Now, in the foreword to the book, Pastor Randy Frazee, I say Frazee, I don't know if it's Frazee, I don't know, but I say Frazee. I don't know. How would you say it? Frazee. Yeah, thank you, Eric. Yeah, Eric knows him, so yeah, thank you very much. He's a pastor. He leads a church down in San Antonio, Texas. He's written some great books, been an influence in mine for a number of years. He says this, quote, "The journey begins when we choose a lifestyle." We talk about way of life here, right? A Jesus-centered way of life. When we choose a lifestyle of conversation and community over a lifestyle or a way of life of busyness and accumulation, unquote. This is going to be very difficult for those of us who live in a place like Montgomery County, Maryland. And, one of the things that just makes it so hard is it's not just a rat race because people live here. It's because it's so daggum expensive to live here. Laura and I, we're trying to buy a place, and had we been in this journey a few years ago when the interest rates were 2.89 or whatever, we would be buying a house right now. We cannot. We can't afford it. We couldn't afford it for 18 years, the first 18 years of our son, because we just couldn't afford it. Now Laura's working. Okay, we can afford something, now, and now it's very, very hard. Laura's working, I'm working, 2 jobs, started a business, all this, trying to just make it work. So it's somewhat of a catch-22. And so we want to be careful when we talk about living in this area. I mean, you can't just quit everything and still live in Montgomery County and just walk around in the park every day. You just can't do that. So it is difficult. We have to we have to hold all that intention and figure out what kind of lifestyle do we want to live, and what can we change and what can't we change. I do premarital counseling all the time with couples, and I just help them. A lot of times the stress level's off the roof. Maybe Weston can relate. As you're getting ready to get married, there's extra stress, like paying for a wedding, all the decisions, and now all that kind of stuff on top of life in general. And I try to help couples recognize what can you control that maybe you're stressed out about, that if you could just control it a little bit more, and then there's certain stress that's outside of your control that you can't control, right? And knowing the difference is very, very important. Now, the power and genius of the Great Commandment is that it's so simple and yet extremely powerful when acted upon. The smartest thing we can do collectively to impact our city is to actually live out Jesus' command to love our neighbors. Did you agree with that? I mean, it's the smartest thing we could do. It's the wisest thing a church could do. It's the most powerful, most effective thing that we could do, is just go out and love on people. I hope this sounds good so far, but the reality is that so many of us have become numb to the Great Commandment. I'm at the first in line. At first, when it comes to applying to certain people. The Great Commandment's a great idea for people we like. We tend to love people, however, very selectively. Rather than loving the specific people that God has sent us to love, we like to pick and choose the people that we love. If we're not intentional, we end up having a metaphorical love for a metaphorical neighbor, and the end result is that we actually do very little. So in other words, we agree, yes, great commandment, yes, we love our neighbor as we love ourselves. I'm going to determine which neighbor I'm going to love, though, because I metaphorically love all my metaphorical neighbors. And then when we think like that, then we don't end up really loving our neighbors very well. So, Laura and I, we've been on a journey for this for many years. When we got married in 2001, I know it's hard to believe we're even that old, I know. I was actually in Fleet Feet the other day. I was exchanging some shoes. Yeah, I was exchanging some shoes. And I told the guy's 28 years old, he looks young, he's a runner and all this. And I'm like, yeah, man, I'm 47. And he was like, dude, really? You look great. And I was like, thanks, man. He's like, how do you look so good? I'm like, well, I don't normally get mistaken for looking so good, but running, I don't know, like I'm here. Running helps. It helps to be physical, I guess. But when we got married in 2001, we lived in rural upstate New York. I'm talking rural. We had very few neighbors. I mean, there just weren't, there was a couple hundred people in the whole town. Right? It's tiny, tiny, tiny place. We did what we could think of. We just did what we could think of to get to know those near us. There was a crazy cat lady a couple of houses down, and we had a tragic incident. I'm sure Laura remembers. I hit one of her cats one day. Oh, I still to this day, I just get a knot in my stomach, Oh, it was terrible. Has nothing to do with the story, but that was not a good, loving, neighborly kind of thing to do. But we longed, during that season, it was 1 year. It was 1 year, our first year of marriage. It was my senior year of college. I was graduating. Laura was working to help me get through, and then we were moving down here to start grad school. And we just longed to move so that we could really, really then live on mission in a neighborhood. I wish I could tell you that, man, we moved down here and we just figured out neighboring and loving our neighbors really well. But we've lived on mission in a few neighborhoods since then. And what I can tell you is that it's very difficult to choose what Pastor Frazee says, to choose a lifestyle of conversation and community over a lifestyle of busyness and accumulation. When we started the church about 7 years ago, we started throwing some block parties and gathering who we could from our neighborhood block. We've had ups and downs, but honestly, at the time, we didn't know very many neighbors' names. Okay, so that was 7 years ago. We'd lived there already been living there about 5 years. And it was embarrassing, right? And we've made some strides since then. I know some more of my neighbors' names. We hang out a little bit more. We're a little bit more friendly. But honestly, busyness has a way of creeping back in, and so we make excuses and we barely love well. I think I just want to say to you as we begin this journey that I find it just hard. I feel like I'm at times, if I really evaluate it, at times I'm loving well. Just the other day, my Muslim neighbor from Ethiopia, who we've had a long, good relationship, and he just tends, so they're in Ramadan, kind of end of Ramadan, and he tends to just stop sometimes, and he'll just stand with me. I don't know if it's a cultural thing or what, but as an American, I'm like, okay, do you have a question or something? It's embarrassing, and I don't know what's in his mind, but he's not questioning me. He's not like, hey Ed, what's going on? He'll just stop, and I'm like trying to think of things, hey, all right, hey, have a great day. Good to see you. Well, the other day, I'm washing my car. It's only been 6 months since I've washed my car. So I'm doing my biannual car wash. And so I'm out there and I got this pressure washer that I bought both to wash my car, and it's this real cheap electrical thing, and he do my deck and everything. And he starts asking me about it. And you do a sermon series like this, you start reading the book, you show up to one of our community groups, and I encourage all of you to do it, but things are going to start happening, and God is going to begin saying, okay, Ed, are you real? Okay, I'll put this opportunity before you. You want a neighbor well? I'll have them show up at your door. So here he is, he's talking to me about this, and I'm kind of particular with my stuff. I like to take care of my stuff. I'm not like the neighbor who gives all my stuff away, whatever. And I just felt like in this moment, we're talking. I was like, oh, yeah, I bought it. I said, listen, man, I'm pretty sure his name's Muhammad. He's never corrected me, but I'm not sure if it's his dad. Like, he introduced his dad as Muhammad, because I know his dad was visiting from Ethiopia one time. But I call him Muhammad. I think his name's Muhammad. I've never been corrected. I don't know. Is that right, babe? I think it's Muhammad, yeah. And so I'm like, hey, Muhammad, listen, if you need this anytime, like, just let me know. Like, I'll even come and help you. Oh, yeah, and I just thought, okay, this is a step, to say, hey, anytime. And I'm going to push him a little bit on it over the next couple months. Hey, I noticed on your day, you want me to come? I can bring my thing over, or I'll just give it, you want to use it? And I'm going to try to open that up. But brothers and sisters, it's difficult. It's difficult. I'm looking forward to growing with you in my love for my neighbors and doing some new and old things to get to know and love them more this year than ever. And I can't wait to see what God is going to do in and through us. Each Sunday for 4 weeks, I'm going to share messages that I hope will motivate us all to take next steps. Then in our community groups, we'll really dig into the topics and flesh it out more specifically and graciously hold each other accountable. The ABCs of community group. We try to go in opposite order. C is care. Really kind of starts with that. B is belonging. So care and belonging have to happen first, right? You have to have some trust and relationship. So where you can get to A, which is accountability. Like, Bruce doesn't just show up to the group, first Wednesday. And I'm like, all right, Bruce, how's your quiet time going? How's your reading? Hey, man, how you loving your neighbor? No, like, Bruce doesn't know me. We don't know each other, right? So now we get to know each other. Now, Bruce is holding me accountable for running. So, Ed, how's it coming along? Whatever. We have some accountability now. And so hopefully in our groups over the next few months, with lots of grace, with lots of patience, with many of us saying, man, I intended to do this. I really struggled. Hey, bro, we're here. We're going to pray for you. What's your neighbor's name? Yes, we're going to pray for that neighbor. What are you going to do in this next 2 weeks? Okay, we're here. We're going to champion. Well, oh, you want to rake your neighbor's leaves? We'll show up and help you rake your neighbor's leaves, whatever it is. You're going to throw a block party. Can we get some people to my block party so it looks like it's actually a party? You can be like mock neighbors and come, and you can be like the startup neighbor group. So it looks like I got some neighbors at the block party. For real. So are you ready? There are two main texts we're going to dig into this morning. First, Acts 17, we read one of the greatest sermons in the Bible from the Apostle Paul. We're not going to read the whole thing, but just a little bit of it. He was in Athens, Greece, a powerful and diverse city, where he spoke the truth in love to people filled with pride for their culture and their way of life. In fact, the Greeks, especially the Athenians, prided themselves on being racially superior. You think this is relevant for us today? I think so. Now, we don't have time to get into the whole message, but he makes a powerful statement that helps us build a theology of place. When we were starting the church, one of my mentors, J.R. Woodward, he wrote a great book. He taught us, the pastors who started this church, there's a place that God's sending you to. You got to know that place. Now we're in a different place. What are the Kentlands like? What's the school like? What's Gaithersburg like? What's Montgomery County like? What are the needs? What are the idols? God sends us to a place. Then people. So there's a leadership team. There's a leadership community. There's a people who are helping to serve. What are those people like? What are they burdened for? How are they gifted? How are they wired? What do they like to do? People, place, and theology. What's the theology of the church? Do we believe in certain things and not, that shapes the church. And so we're talking about building a theology of place. God has sent us right here to this school, in this community, in this city, and in this county. So we're going to build a little bit of a theology of place. Listen to what Paul says. This helps us understand why it's important to see ourselves first as missionaries sent to the places we live. Not just missionaries that we spend money, we send money over there, but we're missionaries right here, every single one of us. If we understand that we've been sent, listen to this, Acts 17, 2 verses, 26 and 27. Here's what Paul said. From one man he made every nation of men. So there's, how many races are there? One human race. From one man and one woman came all of us. Right? So there's one race. If you believe this, I do. From one man, he made every nation of it. By the way, can you do away with Genesis chapter 1 and have Acts chapter 17? Can you do away with Genesis chapters 1 through 11 and still believe Jesus and the Gospels and the rest of the Bible? There's a lot of people that are trying to do that. One of my heroes, it breaks my heart. I mentioned this on my Devo on Thursday. I'm not big on critiquing other churches or other pastors, and I'm not going to get into it here. But one of my heroes has recently said that it's metaphorical and it's not important. I don't understand that. You cannot, brothers and sisters, you cannot believe in a metaphorical creation and believe the rest of the New Testament. Jesus believed it. Jesus believed in a literal Adam. Jesus preached a very important message that you have to have a literal Adam to put the two things together. You with me so far? Still? Hopefully still with me. I want you to think biblically. I want you to think critically, not just when you hear things that I'm saying, but as you're reading your Bible, as you're hearing what other people are saying out in the community. Let's say it this way. It's increasingly unpopular to say that this is your authority. From one man he made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he, God, determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live. Man, when life gets difficult, one of the most important factors, one of the things that is going to affect you most significantly is your theology, what you believe about God. And all of you, right, we've all gone through some tough times. We've all gone through some trials, some more difficult than others. But it is in those times when our theology is tested. And brothers and sisters, this theology is really important. This affects the way we neighbor. Did God determine that I would be born in Silver Spring, Maryland? That I would be born in my family? Did I choose being white and Chinese? I thought you'd amen, Elliot. I mean, come on. We got the Choy Chin brothers here, you know? I mean, Elliot's a little more Chin-like than I am Choy-like, but nevertheless. Listen to this. God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. In other words, God is sending people wherever he determines that they would be sent so that the world can be filled with the knowledge of his glory. So if we live unto his glory and if we live united as one Orthodox Christian family, right, regardless of the church that we're from, then the world can notice that there's something different with these people. The Greeks like to think that they determine their own destiny, which is how many Americans think. It's how I kind of think, how I grew up thinking. I'm not relying on anyone else. I'm the one. I'm not a filter. We're going to keep going. And for that matter, many people in general just live like I'm the captain of my own ship. I determine my own destiny. To some degree, I mean, can you agree with a little part of that? Sort of. Whatever opportunities you have to make whatever free will decisions you have in your life, God is the one who made those available. Your education, your hard work, the open door to work where make the money, all those things were his grace. His grace enabled you to have the smarts to go to school, to get the education you got. He's the one that opened the doors to make it to where you are today. However, we don't usually live where we live by accident, or additionally rather. You aren't actually in the house or townhouse or apartment you live in just because you like the floor plan or the schools or because it's all that you can afford. All those apply to Laura and I. If Paul was right, and this is true, then we live where we live because God has placed us in a specific neighborhood for a reason. And this is really a theology of place and directs us to love where we live. Now, with that in mind, I want to spend the time that we have left, and we don't have a lot of it, so bear with me, going back to one of the most important teachings of Jesus on this topic. If we're going to take the Great Commandment literally, we've got to study it a bit, right? We've got to study it a little bit. So in the context of Luke 10, Jesus has just sent out, think about what's going on in the history of the church. We'll just call it that, right? Jesus is preparing these 12. He's just sent 72 of his followers out. He's just sent them out, and they're proclaiming the gospel. They're doing all kinds of amazing things. He's preparing them for a time when he wouldn't be there. He was teaching and training his followers, preparing them to be the church once he left. Did you understand the context, right? As his followers were doing their best to live on mission, an expert in the law brought a challenge to Jesus, which is actually our challenge too. So let's dig in and see how God might speak to us. Luke chapter 10, verse 25. Familiar story. Let's unpack it a little bit. On one occasion, an expert of the law stood up to Jesus. Now, we don't know his motivation, really. I mean, to test Jesus, that word doesn't inherently mean it's overly immoral kind of thing or whatever. We're not sure, but he's certainly testing Jesus. He wants to know. I think that we get the clue down in verse 29, so hold on to that. But he's testing Jesus. He stands a teacher. He calls him teacher. He calls him rabbi. He asks, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Let's just assume that he was genuine. This is a really good person. As far as on a scale of good to bad, this guy's on the top of the good scale. He's an expert in the law. He knows it. And as far as he's concerned, he's pretty much living it. So he's probably got most of us in terms of the high road of morality. He's probably living a better life than I live. Just in terms of straight edge kind of guy. Testing Jesus, of course, not a great idea. Jesus is the master teacher. Now, it's not necessarily a bad idea, but it's a dangerous one. Because if you test Jesus, you're testing God, and you will get an answer. But get ready if you do, because the answer might require making some significant changes in the way that we live, which is exactly what this man got. The question is interesting. It's a good question, though, isn't it? What must I do to inherit eternal life? I mean, I wish people were just pouring in to Restoration Church. And, people were just running in right now. Hey, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? That would be awesome. Doesn't happen a whole lot, but, that'd be awesome. He's wrestling with the bigger picture, which we would all do good to wrestle with a bit more. Notice how Jesus answered. Verse 26. He answers with a question. So good. Well, what's written in the law? How do you read it? Good question. When someone's questioning you, if you have a friend or a family member, or you're getting real about this neighboring whole thing, and you got some neighbors that start questioning you, ask a question in return. Well, what do you mean by X, Y, Z? Well, what do you think? Well, tell me, what is it, did you ever go to any other church? What do you think the church said? What do you think Jesus would say? I don't know what the right question would be, but Jesus did. And he answered, the expert in the law said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." He had it right. I mean, he knew the right thing. And Jesus said, "You have answered correctly." Jesus replied, "Do this and you will live." You got it. You already know. Verse 29, I think, is where we get his motivation and where it was off, and where maybe you and I can relate a little bit more. He says, or at least Luke implies here, he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Like, do you really have to ask that? Love God and love your neighbor as you love yourself. But who exactly is my neighbor? Do I really have to love just anybody? Like, is it just a metaphorical neighbor? And yeah, I'm just going to be loving generally. Or who is that exactly? The expert in the law did what we'd like to do too. He wanted to justify himself and his own shortcomings. He probably thought that he loved well, as he thought about all the loving things that he had done for people, like his family and friends. That good neighbor down the street, John, Josue, whatever neighborhood you're in. Maybe a coworker. He's a good worker. I mean, he treats his coworkers really well. But what about his literal neighbors? I am guilty too. It's easy to love the lovable, nice neighbors. I've got some of those. I've got some nice neighbors that are really friendly. Especially the ones who like go to church and profess to be Christians. Those are the ones that are, oh yeah, hey Joe, hey, going to church? Yeah, going to church too. Have a great Sunday, man. It's awesome, great. Have a good one, love you. Stop by, see the kids anytime. That's easy. But we all have those close to us in our neighborhood, probably at work too, who we just like to avoid. And maybe some of them, we should, I don't know. But Jesus doesn't mind that, right? Well, notice how Jesus answered. In reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. Isn't it interesting? He just launches into this story. Well, who is my neighbor? Well, let me tell you a little story and find yourself in the story. Jesus didn't say that, but I think that's kind of what he implies. So think about who Jesus wants you to identify with in this story. When he was attacked by robbers, verse 30. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, went away, leaving him half dead. He's probably going to die there. It's probably hot. It doesn't say what season it is, but he's robbed, beat up. He's half dead there, right? And so a priest, a religious person who probably knows the Great Commandment, happened to be going down the same road. When he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. No time for that. Someone else will take care of that. Government's got a program, whatever. So too, verse 32, a Levite, another religious person, probably knew the Great Commandment, probably had it memorized. He passed by on the other side too because he's got things to do, can't be bothered. Can't be bothered with that. Verse 33, but a Samaritan, hated Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. His very first response was not, I hate that person. Not, he didn't single out the identity of the person, but I'm sure that he knew immediately this is not a Samaritan brother. This is not my people. He has compassion on him. It's his first thought. Oh God, would you help us to see people and be compassionate toward people in need? So he went. Doesn't hesitate. He bandaged his wounds. He pours on oil and wine, very expensive. He's sacrificing. Nothing about this story tells us that he's wealthy, although he probably has some means. The man put him on his own donkey. He sacrifices himself. He sacrifices his time and his own comfort. He brings him to an inn, which is like a medical treatment center in our day. Like a doctor's office, not like an inn like Jesus was born in an inn. Not like a hotel. Even Jesus, he wasn't like born in a hotel. So, similar kind of a thing, out of the way. Brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day, so he stays overnight. The next day, and he had business to attend to. He had life. He was going somewhere to do something. He probably had to phone it. No, I don't know how he even told anyone he wasn't showing up, send a pigeon forward or something. I have no idea how they would have communicated. But the next day, he took out 2 denarii, which is a significant amount of money, gives them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will, not only did he just give him more money, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Like, this would just not happen today. Like, how he's going to get totally taken advantage, right? The bill's going to be to $8,000. He's not going to be able to pay it. It just wouldn't happen. The 2 men in the story were just random strangers that day. One in an unfortunate situation, and the other who just happened to cross his path at just the wrong time. Loving people rarely happens when it's best for us. Think about this. I've been doing this a little bit more in premarital counseling. I've been challenging couples in the first session. What does it mean to love? Weston? No, don't you have to answer that. He's getting married in a week. I'm sure you got that, nailed down. But we don't generally love, we don't define love as like the easy, most natural thing, right? When you think about it in the context of marriage or parenting or family or even a very close friend, usually loving somebody is when I'm making a sacrifice and I'm willing to be uncomfortable because I love you, I care about you. God usually calls us to love when it's inconvenient because love isn't easy, is it? Hardly. So which one of these 3? Verse 36. Which one of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? Duh. The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Mercy, compassion. We know nothing about the man who was robbed, do we? We don't know anything about him. There was nothing about him that merited special treatment. He was just a neighbor in need. It didn't matter that he was probably raised to hate Samaritans. So he was likely racist in that sense. He probably was raised to absolutely despise Samaritans, and the Samaritan was probably raised in a household to hate Jews. They hate each other, right? It's like going over to Israel right now, and being in Gaza, and it's just the two sides. They're just the cultures just hate each other, and they're for good reason. For good reason. I don't know about the reason back then, but it was a little bit different than like the conflict over the last 70 years in the world, right, or more. Do you understand what I'm saying, right? So, I mean, there's good reason that there's conflict today, or back then, I don't know that they'd taken the land or killed anyone or whatever, but the Jews prided themselves on being pure Jews, and the Samaritans were like half-breeds, and so they just hated each other. But when Jesus restores someone, they are restored back to the heart of God, who hates partiality and favoritism of any form, especially when people judge others based solely on the color of their skin or their culture or religious background. Jesus wrapped it up with a clear command. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Pretty simple, pretty basic. I started my doctoral dissertation really with this story, we should have churches that reflect the diversity of our city, because God calls us not just to be with people who are like us, but intentionally be willing to go across the street, or in this case, just stumble upon the person who is in front of you. And if you live in Montgomery County, there's no way you could be in a place where everybody looks like you, where everybody's the same culture as you. There's no way. You can't walk out your front door. Depending on what neighborhood you live in, but it's pretty hard to do that, right? So I want to step back for a moment, since we normally try to identify with the Samaritan. Who have you identified in the story? I think the story is more about putting ourselves first and foremost into the shoes of the man who was robbed first. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever put yourself into the shoes of the person who was mugged? How would you feel? How would you feel if someone that you grew up hating, and that person hated you just because of what you look like or your culture or whatever, and you woke up one day after being mugged and jumped, and you're in an inn, and you're like, who? And you just imagine you wake up and the innkeeper's taking care of you, and the innkeeper's like you, right, from your same culture, and you're like, oh, this is amazing, thank you so much. And the innkeeper's like, well, hey, hang on. I just wanted to let you know that it was the Samaritan who did this. He put you up. He gave us this extra money. He's going to come back, in the next couple of days. Oh, a what? A Samaritan? He tells you the whole story, how the man helped you and bandaged your wounds and carefully set you on his donkey and went out of his way to make sure that you made it to the inn and further cared for. And he even said that he would pay extra expenses to ensure that your recovery would be in full. Now, how do you feel about the Samaritan? Your attitude towards Samaritans is likely to change. You will probably be forever grateful to the man who saved your life. And once your life has been spared, you are much more likely to extend mercy to others and help who in need as well. Not for sure, but you're more likely, at least, to be changed by that. The Samaritan met the physical, material, financial, and emotional needs of the man in his path. We have neighbors who have similar needs in our path on a regular basis too. Maybe that neighbor whose yard is unkempt and the light's broken and the doorbell's broken and there's, maybe it looks all unkempt. Who knows what's going on inside that house? Who knows what desperate need they have for a neighbor to be neighborly? Think about your own self if you've gone through a difficult time. I know just in losing my grandmother who was 97, it was great. And it's felt like a dark cloud many days. I just haven't been motivated to do the everyday things that I would normally be motivated by, let alone if a spouse passed. Or just imagine in some house near where you live, someone's probably caring for somebody that's in a desperate situation, dealing with family member who's committed suicide or lost a job or got some bad news, and everything on the outside of their house and the outside of their life just looks like it's falling apart, and you want to call the HOA to report them. Maybe it's just me. Yes, there's poop on my sidewalk again. You might be thinking to yourself, according to this story, your coworkers, the parents on your kids' team, the person you serve through the PTSA are all neighbors. And that's 100% true. All that's true. But that doesn't lessen the fact that our literal neighbors are still our neighbors. Great things happen when we begin to build relationships with those who live closest to us, and we work out from there. So let's dream a bit together this morning as we wrap this up and begin to go down this journey. Let's dream of the possibilities of what God can do in and through us as we begin to build a culture of neighboring here. It's not that we're beginning to build it here. We've been doing this for years. A culture of invitation, possibly even seeing other churches join and rally together to neighbor well so that our community is better served and blessed, and more of the basic needs of our neighbors in our community are met rather than depending on the government or just depending on someone else to do it, a nonprofit, etc., to meet the needs that we might be able to meet instead. I don't know what's going to happen, but I believe some things will happen as we just begin to get just take a little bit more intentionality. We've been doing this, right? And as we've been asking the question even here in the school, by God's grace, we started a food pantry that's opened up many other doors, and over the next couple months, y'all, it's really exciting. Our board's going to be meeting tonight to make some decisions and set money aside, and things are going to really begin happening, and opportunities are going to hold or will present themselves. So how different would it be to personally know 3 or 4 or 5 or even 8 of your literal neighbors by name? What I want you to do, somewhere around your seat, you've got one of these charts. Take that out just for a second. Just imagine if you knew what 3, 4, 5, or 8 of your neighbors really cared about, or what burdens them, or how to best serve them. Imagine if 3, 4, 5, or even 8 of your literal neighbors knew your name, and knew what you do, and knew what you cared for and cared about, and how they could serve you in your time of need. And they had your cell phone number. And if they knew that they saw some ambulance outside of your house, and they saw you or your wife or a family member or a child or someone going, then they could call you and text you and say, hey, what's going on? How can we help you? Imagine the impact we can make in this community just by authentically loving our literal neighbors. That's what this series is all about. And really, that's what we're all about, the mission of Jesus, right? To love people so practically and tangibly that they cannot deny the presence of God in and through us, and are drawn not so much to us, but they're drawn to Him. So let's make this super practical. With every Connect card, again, you got one of these around this is called the block map. This can be a powerful tool. This is yours, powerful tool. We'll talk about this in community groups as well. Take a moment right now just to reflect on your closest neighbors. You are here in the middle. See, that's you. You can, if you want, get creative as you want. Write your names, draw little stick figures. How many little people are in your house, and you can color it, get your kids involved, whatever. But take a minute, right? Those who live in the 8 houses that are closest to you. List out as many of your immediate neighbors as you can. Can anyone list 8 of your neighbors by name? I think there are 9 townhouses on our row. And we've lived there for 11 or 12 years. And our neighbors have not changed really at all. I mean, the people on the end changed. So I know that it's Elle and Chad. They moved from Utah. And here's how we know them. Our kids walk to school together. So it's easy. They're out all the time. We got to know them. We know their kids. Laura, we know them, right? How about the people who live next door to them? Well, we do know them, the Barbour family. And we've been friends with them. And how do we know them? Oh, my oldest son was best friends with their youngest son growing up. So that's how we connected with them. How about the family next to them? African-American family who I've never talked to. I see these 2 young, they come in, they park, they go in and out. I never see them. We're on one end, they're on the other end. We don't park next to each other. They never come walking up down our street when we're out, and I've never seen them walking by. I don't even know who they are. I don't know when they moved there. I have no idea who they are. All of the other neighbors we know fairly well personally. We've had a few of them in our house. There's a family we don't even know. How many could you list? Maybe 5, maybe 4, maybe 3. Maybe there's one that you really know. Has anybody been in your house? Any of your neighbors been in your house? Have you been in their house? This is not meant to make you feel bad. I want you to know, like when you're on that map, you are here. So not only just geographically, but I want you to know where you are in relationship to your neighbors. And let's see how that might change as we do some really simple, maybe scary things over the next several months. When I did this back in 2017, I was embarrassed by the fact that I knew under half of my neighbors' names. We had lived in the same place at that point for 5 years. Going through this exercise and beginning to throw block parties and being intentional with our neighbors has really helped. But I'm still embarrassed by the fact that while I know more names and I've had some good conversations, I still don't really know my neighbors well, and I don't think they know. They probably think some really weird, crazy things about me. They all see me like, walking up and, oh, hey, neighbor. Who wants to talk after you've been running 16 miles, They know I run. I don't know. That's about maybe all they know. There are 2 major obstacles that we have to face and overcome: time and fear. And we're going to talk about those the next 2 Sundays, and then begin putting more of a personal plan for loving our neighbors together as we unpack this in community groups. So I hope you'll be a part of it. In the meantime, I want you to do 2 things. We'll wrap up. I'm going to pray. Elliot's going to come. We're going to sing a few songs and wrap all this up. But first, I want you to just work on this, like over the next few weeks. This is yours. You don't have to hand it in to anyone. But just use this. Do as much with this as you want. Try to name as many of your neighbors as you can. And use this. You can keep this on your fridge, or maybe if your neighbors actually come in your house, put it in your drawer, so they don't see it. And then whenever you meet a neighbor and they tell you something, anything about their life, where they work, what they do, what they like, kids' names, grandkids' names, something that happened, write it here. Blow it up, maybe, however you want to do it. But have a place where you write information about your neighbors as you do it. I have an Evernote file, for mine. And then second, would you pray this simple prayer with me? And we're going to close our time with this every day. Would you just pray this every day when you leave in the morning, when you come home, and even before you fall asleep? God, give me a desire to love my literal neighbors. Give me that desire, because quite frankly, it starts with that. If we're honest, probably most of us would say, there's some neighbors I don't want to waste my time with. And maybe, God's not going to open up, this isn't like, we're all going to sign up to go live in a mud hut in Africa and suffer. It's not that. This can be the adventure of a lifetime. This can be the most fun, exciting, challenging, life-transforming thing. God may actually use us to see some people that are far from God come near to Him in the weeks and months ahead. So remember, a good neighbor always trumps a good program. A good neighbor, that's you and me. A good neighbor trumps a church program. Inviting them to something, that's fine or whatever, but most people aren't going to come to our programs. Most people aren't going to show up to Easter service. We had a family from the neighborhood or whatever that came last week, but most of the people came. They weren't your neighbors, right? I don't know if you invited them or not, but they're unlikely to come to our church programs. Be a good neighbor. Be a great neighbor, and let's see what God will do. Let's pray.